Hey guys, you are watching the Brainy and Funny Medico, and I welcome you to another video. In this video, we will discuss about the examination system for MBBS and particularly for first year MBBS. This is the fourth part of orientation to MBBS. You have to appear in professional exams for every year from the 5 years of MBBS, and now there is another exam called NLE in Pakistan, in which you have to appear after the 5 years professional exams. So, in a professional exam, you have to appear in three forms of assessment. First of which is written exam, the second one being viva was, and the third one is OSPE and practical. So the total marks for professional exam of first year MBBS that is taken by UHS are 600, 200 for physiology, 200 for anatomy, and 200 for biochemistry. There are three major subjects, and the 100 marks are for written of a subject, and the other 100 marks are comprising of viva and practicals both. Now coming towards the written exam, the total marks for written exam of any subject are 100, and the total marks for professional exam that is written are 90, while the remaining 10 marks from the total 100 marks are meant for the internal assessment. So now what is internal assessment? It basically includes all the class tests, term tests, stages, sub-stages in which you appear throughout the year. The stages and sub-stages are basically for anatomy, gross anatomy. When you are studying a particular region, say upper limb, instead of taking a test of the whole region, which becomes way too lengthy and difficult for the students, the whole region is divided into smaller parts, and then the test for a smaller part consisting of a few topics is taken for the sake of learning and easily grasping the concepts by the students. So the shorter tests would be called the substages, while when you give a test for the whole region, for the whole upper limb, then it would be called a stage. The substages are before the stage, and they can be written, they can be by taking viva, or they can be even of the OSPs. Also, the stage is taken in all three formats: written, viva, and OSP. This is just for the practice of the students before appearing in their professional exams. So the 10 marks of internal assessment that are included in the professional exam are based on how you perform throughout the year. So you got to take all the tests, all the sub-stages, stages, term tests, whatever your college is taking from you guys throughout the year, because internal assessment really matters in the whole professional exam, and it can save you from many problems later. Even if you haven't prepared the test properly, I'll suggest that you should at least appear in the test. As far as the written professional exam is concerned, its pattern includes 45 multiple choice questions that will be of 45 marks, each MCQ carrying 1 mark, and the short essay questions that are SCQs will be 9 in number, each of 5 marks. So the total marks for SEQs will be 45 marks, and SEQ might be consisting of 2 or 3 parts, or it might be consisting of a full-fledged whole topic for 5 marks. Now coming towards the viva was, it is the viva for theory part. You also have to appear in the viva for practicals. The viva for theory part is basically taken by two examiners. One is your internal examiner and the other one is your external examiner. The internal examiner being your head of department or any senior professor of that department, while the external examiner either comes from another college or is sent by UHS. Now for the viva of theory part, basically it happens that for a particular subject, the topics are being divided among the internal and external examiners. Now for example, say there is anatomy, so the external examiner might be taking viva from upper limb and embryology, while the internal examiner might be taking from thorax and lower limb. Histology's viva is basically included with the practicals when you have to identify the slides and draw the long slide, and GA's viva is not particularly included. The examiners might ask some question related to GA, general anatomy, but basically it focuses on gross anatomy and embryology. So we will be discussing about practicals now. Practicals basically have three main parts. The first one of which is OSPE, the second one being long practical, while the third one is viva, that is for the practical part, So now talking about OSPE, it is the abbreviation for Objectively Structured Performance Evaluation. It basically includes some stations, identification stations. So there are some observed stations and there are some non-observed stations. There might be, like 10 non-observed stations. On the non-observed stations, there are some questions written. There might be some apparatus for you to identify. In case of histology, there are different slides for identification. You one by one go to that station. For starting from station number 1, you move to 2 and station 3, then 4, and so on, while completing the all 10 or 12 stations, depending upon how much stations are assigned. On each station there would be an apparatus for you to identify. For example, in physiology it might be Newbar's chamber or the blood pressure measuring apparatus, that is a sphygmomanometer, while in the case of biochemistry there might be some reagent or diluting agent, and there are a couple of questions asked whether about the apparatus or the thing for identification, or they are related to some other practical from your subject. In case of histology there are no questions, but you have to write the 2 identification points for that slide, and also obviously you have to identify it, so you have to write the name for that slide as well. For the OSPE of gross anatomy, you have different models and some specimens from the cadaver, or there might be the whole cadaver placed on that particular station. There are some pins attached to the models and specimens. You have to identify the structures, whether it's the neurovascular structure, or it may be a muscle or joint or the capsule or any membrane, ligament, it can be anything. Also there are some models for embryology, so some of the stations include the OSPE for embryology too. You also have to perform a long practical. In a long practical, basically there is a practical that is assigned to each student. Each student has a different practical from the other student. The practical is also performed by the student. It is also written by the student by properly giving the procedure, principle, result, observations, everything about the long practical. There is the written part before the performance, and while you perform it, there are some questions asked by the examiner related to the long practical, and that would be the viva for the practicals. The viva can be taken by the internal examiner or external examiner, depending upon which examiner is free at that time. There is also surface marking in anatomy. In anatomy, when you come for the practicals, there is surface marking for maybe 5 marks. In it, you are asked to mark different neurovascular structures, different retinacula. For example, you might be asked to identify and mark the axillary nerve on the surface of a lab assistant, mark the axillary nerve or brachial artery or extensor retinaculum or whatever is assigned to you on the surface, on the skin of that lab assistant with a chalk. You also have to tell the origin, insertion, the course from where it arises, from which muscle layer it passes orally to the examiner while doing the surface marking. Now for practicals of anatomy, you have two auspices. One is for the histology and it completely comprises of the slides, while there is one for gross anatomy and embryology combined. There is a long viva for histology, and you don't have a viva for gross anatomy and embryology as it is covered in the theory part of the viva. Then you have no long practical in anatomy, while in physiology and biochemistry you have auspices, and they include different stations consisting of different apparatuses or reagents and couple of questions asked about them. Then you have a long practical for the written and as well as the performance. Then there is a viva related to that long practical by either the internal or external examiner. Then you are also asked to maintain and make some practical notebooks throughout the year. So we will be talking about them now. The practical copies for histology, it is mostly the manual of histology by Tasadduk Hussain in most of the colleges under UHS. On the practical copy, you have to draw different diagrams using the eosin and hematoxylin stains. These are available in the form of pencils. They are of pink and purple colors. You have to buy them throughout the first year and second years of MBBS. For physiology, there are different practical copies for different colleges. It varies from one college to another. Some colleges might have their own practical copies, while there are some practical copies available in the market as well. For example, there is one by Professor Sheeni Haver. So some colleges might be asking you to buy those. There are different practicals in the physiology's practical copy, and you have to write some questions that are related to that practical. They are mostly consisting of the observations, or some might be also related to the theory part of that practical. And as far as the biochemistry copies, practical copies are concerned, they also vary from college to college. You have to make and maintain a notebook, and in it you are writing the practicals or even the questions like observations that are related to the practical as guided by your demonstrators. You have to bring these practical notebooks on the particular practicals day, whether it's for histology, biochemistry or physiology, and they might be also carrying some marks in your internal assessment or in your practicals part for your professional exam. You can look for the marks distribution for different auspices, practicals, long practicals, and the notebooks, vivas in the syllabus for your particular batch year. The syllabus provided by the UHS might get changed or updated after a few years, so you have to be very vigilant and careful about having the current, updated and the specific syllabus for your particular batch. Thank you for listening, and if you have not subscribed to my channel, do subscribe, like this video and comment below in the comment section.